1926 Soviet Union. In the Volga Taiga, far from the eyes of civilization, hidden within the enveloping forest, lay a secret laboratory. At this shrouded in mystery facility, a terrible event took place. Many scientists conducting secret experiments were tortured and killed. Some laboratory staff managed to survive, but were later exterminated by soldiers in accordance with directives from the highest echelons of power. The chief biologist-scientist Ilya Ivanov, a man who had devoted his entire life to science, was detained and then exiled. The Soviet authorities moved heaven and earth to keep the monstrous reality of human-animal crossbreeding hidden from the public eye. However, I learned from the remaining secret documents that several test subjects escaped from the lab to the wild, and their fate is still a mystery. This event, which took place almost 100 years ago in a country that does not exist today, causes me genuine anxiety. Because today, I am practically doing what Soviet scientists did. My name is Albert Stanley, and I'm a scientist. Over the last few years, I have devoted myself to a single cause, an ambitious quest to improve the human condition. I seek to enhance the human species, make us stronger, faster, more intelligent, and far more resilient. Simplistically put, I aspire to create a superhuman. Are you familiar with Marvel movies? Yes, Captain America, he's my guiding light. Granted, a perfect soldier like Steve Rogers is but a fantasy, yet I believe we can make strides towards this ideal. The methods I employ might be radical, perhaps even disturbing to some, but history validates me. From the grand civilizations of ancient Egypt, Babylon, Greece, and Rome, to the mythologies that pervade almost every culture, tales of creatures that are half human, half beast, echo through time. Many a scientist, deemed maniacal by their contemporaries, have penned insightful works on this subject, often shunned by the public eye. Eugen Fischer is one such figure whose horrifying experiments have nonetheless pushed the boundaries of our understanding. It's true, our activities tiptoe along the edges of legality, and that's putting it mildly. Consequently, our lab is meticulously concealed from the prying eyes of the world. A minor inconvenience, I'd argue, not worth fretting over. The crux of the matter is that we are on the cusp of a groundbreaking discovery. Engrossed in this realm of thought, I barely notice my surroundings. The sterile white of the lab is dimly lit by the cold fluorescent lights. A faint hum of the life support systems for the subjects echo in the silent halls. My colleagues, equally absorbed in their work, shuffle around quietly. The air is heavy with anticipation, and a kind of morbid excitement prickles at the back of my neck. We have actually succeeded in accomplishing what was once thought impossible, crossing an ape with a human. We've pushed the envelope far enough. It's time to see if our audacious hypotheses hold water. Either way, we'll have answers. Either way, we'll have made history. Our facility was home to several dozen scientists, each a maven in their respective fields. But, amidst this eclectic congregation, three stood out. Dr. Emily Collins, Michael Harrison, and Henry Isaac. I've been collaborating with them for several years, and in this time, they've become more than just colleagues. They are my family here in this austere edifice of sterile white and cold steel. Security protocols kept us blind to each other's backgrounds, their lives outside this facility, their status in the world. Similarly, they were oblivious to mine. Yet the shared pursuit of the unattainable, the challenge of deciphering the eldritch codes of life itself, had fostered a bond between us, stronger than any personal detail could. They were older than me by several years, a fact that seemed insignificant amidst our mutual respect and camaraderie. Together, we were the driving force behind several groundbreaking developments in our research. I was making my way to Lab Room 68, engrossed in my thoughts when I heard their familiar voices echoing down the stark corridor. They were deep in conversation, their faces animated with a mixture of enthusiasm and gravitas, discussing the concept of superhumans. I slowed my pace to join them. Needless to say, we're not the only ones doing research. Their methods are too primitive in my opinion. Take Singapore, for instance, Harrison argued, his brow furrowed in intense concentration. For 20 years, they've been matchmaking intellectually superior individuals and ensuring their offspring are placed in elite schools. It's crude, but intriguing. And let's not forget China, he continued, gesturing for emphasis. They've isolated about 2,000 high achievers globally, scanning their genomes to discern markers for intelligence. It's a government-backed endeavor to breed superhumans. Isaac, always the pragmatist, countered, "Their methods might seem simplistic, but they are legally and morally sound, plus they've yielded tangible results. Perhaps we should consider our current state and goals in the light of these methodologies." As I approached them, a light-hearted grin playing on my lips, I greeted, "Contemplating a career change, are we?" The three of them laughed, and together we moved towards Lab Room 68, where our most promising breakthrough awaited us, Lucy, a chimpanzee test subject with a human brain. But as we neared the door, a sense of unease crept over me. The usual hum of machinery and muffled chatter of scientists was eerily absent. With a sense of foreboding, I pushed open the lab door. The sight that met my eyes was a nightmarish tableau that will forever be seared into my memory. The lab was a charnel house. Lying at the center of the room was the mangled corpse of one of our lab assistants. He was quite literally torn in two. The stark white of the lab floor was splattered with a morose palette of crimson. The air was heavy with the metallic scent of blood and the overwhelming stench of death. Something similar was already happening at the facility. 2 years prior, one of our scientists had been mauled by a test subject that had managed to escape its confines. We'd attributed that incident to the inherent unpredictability of our work, an occupational hazard. This time, the guards presumed a similar incident. The deep gashes on the assistant's mutilated body hinted at an animal's work, a scenario that seemed plausible considering the subjects we dealt with. Our first course of action was to secure all subjects in Lab 68. To our surprise, we found every animal securely in its enclosure, including Lucy, our primate marvel. The unsettling reality that no animal had escaped made the situation all the more terrifying. To unravel the mystery, we sought the surveillance footage from the previous night. The realization that the recording had inexplicably vanished sent a shiver down my spine. Suspicion fell on my colleagues and me. Emily, Harrison, Isaac, and myself. Our names stood out due to our close involvement with the project. However, with no tangible evidence to implicate us, they allowed us to continue our research. The search for the rogue test subject carried on, but each passing day yielded no new discoveries. The security team was in a state of heightened alert, but the elusive perpetrator remained a phantom. A week later, the tragedy repeated. This time, it was Brian, a brilliant scientist who shared our vision. His body was found gruesomely mutilated in another laboratory, and this time, he was headless. Once again, the surveillance footage was missing. The pattern of events signaled a chilling possibility. Someone was orchestrating these macabre killings and systematically erasing any potential evidence. In the following days, 2 more bodies were found, and a scientist went missing. Anxiety and fear gripped the facility. Our oasis of groundbreaking research was on the verge of closure, just when we stood on the precipice of a monumental breakthrough. But we were scientists, not detectives. It was time to call for help. In a meeting with the other scientists, I took it upon myself to contact the higher-ups. I tried to encapsulate our fears, our desperation, and our determination in my plea. Our work is too important to be abandoned. We have the potential to change humanity's course. These unfortunate incidents are tragic, but they shouldn't spell the end of our research. After several nerve-wracking hours, they agreed. They dispatched a special investigative team to scrutinize the murders and the disappearance. The arrival of the special task force seemed to suspend the bloody toll in our facility. Agent Frank was the leader, a man of few words. With him were 2 more agents, both equally enigmatic. I never learned their names. They were simply shadows accompanying Frank, mirroring his severe disposition. Frank wasted no time. His investigation was swift and thorough. He had each of us interrogated, myself and my closest colleagues, Emily, Harrison, Isaac, and even the custodial staff. No stone was left unturned. Frank also imposed new security protocols and organized patrols. It felt like our lab was under martial law, but given the circumstances, the heavy security presence was a welcome relief. Amidst all the turmoil, we did not let our research slack. We continued observing Lucy. With each passing day, the chimpanzee's behavior altered. Her character became more complex, more nuanced. It was astounding to witness her transformation. It was like seeing evolution on fast forward. The human DNA seemed to strengthen her, not only physically but mentally too. However, like all experiments of this magnitude, there were unforeseen developments. Lucy was demonstrating a level of emotion and intelligence we hadn't anticipated. She was a chimera, half human and half primate, and it was becoming increasingly challenging to understand and control her evolving consciousness. One afternoon I was walking down the corridor, contemplating this quandary, when Frank emerged from the shadows. "Stanley," he beckoned, "join me in my office." I followed him to his makeshift office, a temporary hub for his investigation, cluttered with documents, photographs, and a few old video cassettes. "We managed to recover some of the deleted surveillance footage," he announced. He cautioned me. "The quality is poor, but we hope you might help us decipher some of the details." Its screen flickering to life with the grainy recording. As we huddled over the static-filled footage, I felt a knot in my stomach. The mystery was about to unfurl, but I wasn't sure I wanted to confront the horrors that awaited us. I leaned in, trying to discern the grainy figures. Lab 68. I knew it instantly, even through the static. My heart pounded as the discolored images showed a figure enter the room. Lucy's cage came into view, her anxious eyes flickering with light and shadow. The figure moved, its features hidden by the degraded quality of the footage. It approached Lucy, took a sample of her blood, and then disappeared off camera. A moment later, another figure joined, also shrouded in pixelated anonymity. The two figures huddled together, engaged in an intense conversation. The hushed whispers were lost in the void of the faulty footage. Suddenly, one of the figures lied down on our research table, strapping his arms and legs to the sides. The other figure fastened the remaining straps before disappearing off screen for a moment, re-emerging with a syringe filled with an unknown substance. I held my breath as I watched him plunge the syringe into the other man's arm. A chill ran down my spine as the scene began to unravel into madness. The man on the table began convulsing, his body writhing with an unseen force. His screams of agony filled the room, growing louder with each passing moment. Suddenly he broke free from his shackles, and like a beast, rushed at the other with primal fury. Yet the second man didn't flee. Instead, he exhibited an almost inhuman strength and speed, evading the frenzied attacks and finally killing the crazed man with an ease that was terrifying. Grab him with his bare hands and tear him in two. Frank paused the footage, his gaze sharp as he turned to me. "Do you recognize them, Stanley?" he asked, his voice heavy with suspicion. Sweat drenched my back as my mind reeled from the horrifying scene. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my voice. "The man who was killed," I began. "He's the first victim we found in the lab, but the second man, I can't identify him. Although," I added, "he seems vaguely familiar." Frank considered my words, a flicker of understanding in his eyes. "Maybe if there are more records or another viewing, I can recognize him," I suggested. Our discussion was interrupted by the piercing shriek of the lab's alarm system. A guard burst into the room, his face pale with terror. "We've got a situation," he stammered. "The animals, they've been released. The whole lab is in chaos." Frank's office door closed with a sharp thud behind him as he rushed out, leaving me alone. As soon as the door clicked shut, the eerie silence was replaced by a cacophony of gunshots, screams, and the haunting growls of the liberated lab animals. Fear slithered down my spine, settling into a heavy knot in my stomach. I hid behind a large desk, my breaths shallow, ears straining for every noise that echoed through the lab's labyrinthine corridors. I was jarred from my fear-induced paralysis when a frantic knocking shattered the relative quiet. A guard was pleading from the other side of the door, his voice edged with terror. I sprinted towards the door, but just as I reached for the handle, a guttural growl echoed through the room, followed by the guard's horrified scream. I froze, my blood turning to ice. The guard's screams died away, replaced by the sickening crunch of bones and the quiet chomping of an animal. I hastily retreated, hiding again behind the desk, my hand clamped over my mouth to keep my own scream from escaping. Time crawled agonizingly slow in that office. The chaos outside ebbed and flowed, marked by sporadic screams and growls. Then, an ominous banging on the door sent my heart hammering against my chest. Each violent thud reverberated through the room, the beast outside relentlessly battering the door. I watched helplessly as the door began to buckle under the force. Suddenly, the banging stopped. In the eerie silence that followed, I heard the distant growls of what sounded like two different animals. Then a cacophony of noise erupted in the hallway, growing fainter and fainter until silence fell once again. An hour later, footsteps echoed in the corridor outside. Then a knock, followed by a familiar voice. Isaac. Relief flooded through me, followed swiftly by the adrenaline that spurred me towards the door. Emily Collins was with him. She said, "Thank the gods you're alive, Albert." We had to leave. As we navigated the blood-soaked corridors of the lab, the grotesque aftermath of the unleashed animals laid bare. Dead lab workers, guards ripped apart. It was a scene straight out of my darkest nightmares. I turned to Isaac, asking him how they had found me. His answer was simple. Earlier, Frank had shown them the same camera footage in his office that he had shown me, and it was logical to assume that I was there, if not in lab num 68. Suddenly, a rustling sound had us spinning around. Frank stood at the end of the hallway, his body bloodied, a gun clutched in his trembling hands. "Run, Albert! Run!" he bellowed, his words punctuated by a frenzied urgency. I froze in shock, not realizing what was happening. Frank got ready to shoot and started yelling again. "For the last time, Mr. Stanley, run! Those bastards next to you are not human beings." My eyes widened in shock as I turned to Isaac, only to be greeted by an impossible sight. Isaac's skin was shifting color, his eyes now a deep, unfathomable black. A dread-filled realization clawed at the edges of my consciousness. The world tilted beneath my feet, the lab's fluorescent lights overhead blurring as I sank to the floor in horror. The sharp report of Frank's gun echoed around me, each bullet slicing through the air with deadly intent. Isaac, with brute inhuman strength, shoved me back sharply, my back connecting painfully with the wall. Dazed and gasping, I struggled to my feet. Frank continued to fire at Isaac, who was darting around like a ghost, unnaturally agile, unscathed by the barrage of bullets. Emily stood to one side, an eerie spectator to the chaos. A sudden movement caught my eye. Emily was turning towards me, her eyes vast pools of darkness set into an unnaturally pallid face. A surge of primal fear shot through me, propelling me into a desperate sprint. Emily's mocking laughter followed me. "Stop, you fool! Where will you go?" Rounding a corner, I skidded to a halt, coming face to face with a massive brown bear. It roared, swiping a massive paw towards my head. I braced for impact, but it never came. Emily had thrown herself onto the beast with incredible speed, engaging it in a violent dance of survival. Shaken, I continued to flee, following the labyrinthine passages until I emerged into the night. The imposing silhouette of the lab gave way to a dense forest and an empty parking lot. I felt a pang of despair as I realized my car keys were still in lab room 68. Panic pushing me onward, I plunged into the forest, branches whipping at my face as I ran blindly. After what felt like an eternity, I stumbled onto a deserted road. I doubled over, lungs burning, each breath a victory over the terror-filled night. A voice sliced through my panting breaths. "Hi, Albert." I looked up to see Michael Harrison standing a few yards away, a smile playing on his lips. My heart lurched in alarm. His casual demeanor was off-kilter with the horrors unfolding back at the lab. He claimed to have escaped, yet there was an uncanny calmness to him that set my nerves on edge. Slowly, I began to back away. His smile didn't falter as he asked me where I was heading. His words sent a fresh wave of panic washing over me. It felt like a trap. A rustling sound behind me confirmed my worst fears. Isaac and Emily emerged from the shadows, their once familiar faces twisted into monstrous caricatures. I was surrounded, each path of escape blocked by nightmarish figures, my mind reeling in a vortex of fear and betrayal. A sense of impending doom gripped me as I watched Emily approach, a syringe gripped in her hand. Before I could react, she stabbed it into my arm, a cruel smile dancing on her lips. Fear-induced adrenaline coursed through my veins as I fell back onto the cold asphalt. "What is this? What did you just inject me with?" I croaked, my voice weak and trembling. The only response was Emily's chilling smile widening. "You are now one of us, my dear Albert," she replied, her voice a dissonant melody of triumph and malice. A shockwave of searing pain swept over me, each nerve ending ablaze. I screamed in anguish as the world around me started to blur and twist. Darkness claimed me before I could process the horrifying implications of Emily's words. I came back to consciousness slowly, my mind foggy and disoriented. I tried to move, only to find myself strapped down, my limbs confined by unyielding restraints. The dull hum of an engine and the unmistakable sensation of motion confirmed my worst fear. I was on a small aircraft, a prisoner to my former colleagues. I attempted to call out, to demand answers, but the sound that escaped my throat was not my own. It was a low, inhuman animal growl, the horrifying implications of which sent a fresh wave of terror crashing through me. Isaac emerged from the shadows of the aircraft cabin, his gaze falling upon me. "You can't talk right now, right? It's the side effects of your substance. Remember what Emily injected you with?" "Yes, it's entirely your design, Albert. Thank you." His words hit me like a gut punch. My research, twisted into this monstrous formula. Panic surged through me. "Now there'll be more like us," Isaac continued, seemingly oblivious to my internal turmoil. 100 years ago, when we were running away from that laboratory in the Volga taiga with Emily and Michael, we could not even imagine that our race could live peacefully among humans, let alone make more of us. But you gave us hope, Albert. His revelation hung in the air like a shroud. Not human? Had my colleagues been something else all along? A race running from persecution, now seeking expansion? Fear and bewilderment battled for dominance within me. "Now, sleep, my friend," Isaac concluded with an eerie calmness. "Soon we will arrive in Singapore and continue our research." As unconsciousness pulled me under once more, I was left with the bitter realization that I had unwillingly become a part of their monstrous plan. And as the airplane carried me farther from home, I was left to wonder what horrors awaited me in Singapore.